Do you believe that our reality is the only one that exists? What if we told you right now that there are documented cases of people who claim to have slipped between worlds, experiencing places that shouldn't exist, and meeting versions of themselves that defy all logic? If you think parallel universes are just science fiction, then we're very curious to see how you explain these 5 mysterious cases. So let's jump straight into the first case. This one will make you question everything you thought you knew about reality. Number 5. The man from Taured. Imagine arriving at an airport, confidently presenting your passport, only to have security tell you that the country printed on it doesn't exist. Not that it's a forgery, not that it's expired, but that the entire nation has never existed. Now imagine insisting with absolute certainty that you've been traveling on this passport for years. This is exactly what happened in July 1954 at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. To this day, nobody can explain it. A well-dressed European businessman approached customs after a routine flight. He spoke multiple languages fluently. His passport appeared genuine with stamps from previous travels. But there was one problem. His passport claimed he was from a country called Taured. When customs officials told him no such country existed, the man became visibly confused and frustrated. Indicating a location between France and Spain, where the Principality of Andorra sits. "This is Taured," he insisted. "I've lived there my entire life." The man's confusion seemed absolutely genuine. He carried currency from several European countries. His passport contained stamps from previous trips to Japan and other nations. He had a driver's license from Taured. He even had corporate documents from a company that, when investigated, did exist, but had never heard of him. Hotel records showed he'd stayed in Japan before, but those hotels had no documentation of his previous visits. The mystery deepened with every document examined. Japanese authorities detained him in a hotel room while they investigated. They posted guards outside his door on the 15th floor. There was no balcony, no fire escape, no possible exit except through the guarded door. The next morning, when officials returned to question him further, the man had vanished. Completely. The room was empty. The guards insisted nobody had passed them during the night. But here's what makes this case extremely eerie. All of his documents had also disappeared. His passport, his driver's license, his corporate papers, everything was gone from the locked security office where they'd been stored. Japanese officials conducted an extensive investigation. According to reports from the time, they verified that the hotel room had no means of escape. They questioned the guards repeatedly. They searched for any accomplices. Nothing. Researchers and journalists have tried to track down official police records from the incident. And while some documentation exists referencing an unusual detention case from that period, complete records remain frustratingly elusive. Some investigators found references in Japanese newspapers from 1954 mentioning a mysterious European traveler. But details are sparse. So what happened? Did this man slip through from a parallel reality where Taured exists instead of Andorra? Was he an elaborate hoaxer who somehow executed an impossible escape in evidence theft? Or did reality itself correct an anomaly, pulling him back to wherever he came from? How do you explain the genuine confusion of a man who seemed to have complete documentation for a country that never existed? An absolutely fascinating thought. If you're enjoying this video, we'd really appreciate a like and a subscription. Number 4. The Lerina Garcia case. What you're about to hear sounds like a plot from a science fiction movie. But it comes from a real woman who, in 2008, posted a desperate plea on internet forums looking for someone who could explain what had happened to her reality. Her name is Lerina Garcia. And one morning she woke up in a world that was almost but not quite the same as the one she'd have fallen asleep in. It was an ordinary morning in Madrid, Spain. July 16, 2008, Lerina Garcia, 41-year-old professional, opened her eyes in her apartment and immediately sensed something was wrong. The bed sheets felt different. She couldn't explain why, but they weren't the sheets she'd gone to sleep in. Brushing off the strange feeling, she got ready for work. But when she got into her car, she noticed the parking spot was different. Again, just slightly off. She drove to her office, a place she'd worked for 20 years, and found her department on a different floor than it should have been. Pretty insane, right? But it gets even stranger. Lerina had been in a relationship with a man for 7 months. A happy, stable relationship. That morning, when she tried to contact him, his phone number didn't work. She went to his apartment. A different family lived there. They'd lived there for years, they said. She searched for him online, through friends, through every connection she had. He didn't exist. Not in this reality. But here's what's truly chilling. She discovered she was apparently in a relationship with a different man, her ex-boyfriend from years ago, a man she'd broken up with. Coworkers confirmed she'd been dating him. There were photos on her phone she didn't remember taking. Job was the same, but her current projects were different. Files she'd been working on for months had vanished. Other projects she had no memory of starting were on her desk with her handwriting in the notes. Apartment was her apartment, but small details were wrong. Different towels in the bathroom, books on shelves she didn't remember buying. A dress in her closet she'd never seen before, but it was her size, her style. Time and time again, she encountered these small discrepancies that added up to a reality that was fundamentally different. Lerina wasn't delusional or confused. She was a rational professional who became increasingly distressed as she realized the world around her had shifted. Researchers and psychologists who later examined her case found no evidence of mental illness. No signs of a break from reality, no drug use, no head trauma. She posted her story on forums, desperate to find others who'd experienced similar shifts. Her posts were detailed, consistent, and deeply unsettling. She provided specific details, street names, dates, the exact nature of the discrepancies. What makes this case particularly compelling is that Lerina wasn't the only one. After her post went viral, dozens of others came forward with similar stories of waking up in subtly different realities. Some noticed different historical events. Others found that loved ones had different jobs, different personalities, or didn't exist at all. Scientists have tried to explain it as confabulation or false memories. But how do you explain physical changes, different objects, different locations that others can verify? Did Lerina slip into a parallel universe that diverged from hers years ago? Was there a quantum shift that only she consciously experienced? Or is our reality far more fluid than we've ever imagined? To this day, Lerina has never returned to her original world, or, if she has, she hasn't told anyone. An extremely fascinating thought. What comes next is so unbelievable that you'll probably want to listen to it at least twice. Number 3. The Moberly-Jourdain time slip picture to respectable academics. Walking through the gardens of Versailles on a pleasant summer afternoon, when suddenly the world around them shifts, the air changes. The clothes of passers-by transform into 18th century attire. Buildings appear that shouldn't exist. This happened in August 1901 to 2 British women, and their experience became one of the most documented and investigated reality glitches in history. Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain were not fanciful women. Moberly was the principal of a women's college at Oxford. Jourdain was a respected educator and her colleague. On August 10, 1901, they visited the Palace of Versailles as tourists. They were walking toward the Petit Trianon when, according to their detailed accounts, everything changed. The atmosphere became oppressive, heavy, dreamlike. They described feeling profoundly depressed, as though they'd walked into a place of deep sadness. They encountered people dressed in period clothing, not costumed tourists, but individuals who seemed completely real and natural. A woman shaking a white cloth from a window. 2 men in official-looking uniforms and tricorn hats. The men gave them directions in French that sounded archaic. The architecture around them shifted. Buildings appeared that their map indicated shouldn't be there. They saw a garden kiosk that records showed had been demolished in 1799, time and time again. Details emerged that matched Versailles as it had existed during the reign of Louis XVI, over a century earlier. Most chillingly, they encountered a man sitting near the Petit Trianon, wore a cloak and a broad-brimmed hat. His face, Moberly later wrote, was marked by smallpox and had an expression of most peculiar wickedness. The man turned to look at them, and both women felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Shortly after, a young man in period costume suddenly appeared, speaking urgently and guiding them away. He led them to the Petit Trianon, where they glimpsed a woman in an old-fashioned dress sketching on the terrace. Then, as suddenly as the experience began, it ended. The atmosphere lifted. Modern tourists reappeared. The buildings returned to their present-day configurations. Here's what makes this case absolutely fascinating. Moberly and Jourdain didn't immediately discuss their experience with each other. They both felt something strange had occurred, but were too bewildered to mention it. Only a week later did they compare notes and realize they'd both witnessed the same impossible events. They spent years researching, compiling a detailed account published in 1911 under pseudonyms as an adventure. Researchers and historians have scrutinized their account for over a century. Skeptics suggested they encountered actors rehearsing or confused real tourists with ghosts. But investigations revealed no rehearsals occurred that day. The buildings they described matched historical records of Versailles in the 1780s, including structures that had been demolished before.
1901. Some historians believe the woman sketching was Marie Antoinette herself, matching contemporary descriptions in paintings. The small pox-scarred man might have been the Comte de Vaudreuil, a courtier known to have worn such clothing.
So what happened in Versailles that day? Did Moberly and Jourding experience a genuine time slip, witnessing events from 1789? Were they somehow viewing residual psychic energy from traumatic historical events? Or did they briefly enter a parallel reality where history unfolded differently? Both women maintained their account until their deaths, never wavering, never admitting to fabrication. Pretty insane. Who knows? Are you ready for an escalation? Then pay close attention now. Number 2. The Fermilab photograph. What you're about to hear involves one of the most prestigious physics laboratories in the world. A routine photograph and an impossible figure that appears and disappears in ways that challenge everything we understand about photography, reality, and time. This case is so unbelievable that researchers are still arguing about it today. In June 2009, a photographer was documenting the interior of Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory in Batavia, Illinois, a facility where scientists probe the deepest mysteries of particle physics and quantum mechanics. The photographer set up his camera in a hallway to capture architectural details. The hallway was empty, completely empty. He took several shots within seconds of each other. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. When he reviewed the images later, one photograph contained something that could not exist. In the center of the hallway stood a figure, a tall man in outdated clothing style from perhaps the 1940s or 1950s. He wore a dark suit, fedora, and appeared to be looking directly at the camera. His image was clear, detailed, not a blur or a shadow. Here's what makes this totally insane. The photograph immediately before showed an empty hallway. The photograph immediately after showed an empty hallway. These shots were taken less than 3 seconds apart. The photographer was alone, saw no one enter or exit. Security cameras in the facility recorded no other person in that corridor during that time. Fermilab's security team conducted an immediate investigation. They reviewed all security footage from multiple angles. They interviewed staff members. They examined the photographer's equipment for malfunctions. Nothing explained the figure's appearance. The camera's metadata confirmed all photos were taken in rapid succession, with no time for anyone to enter, pose, and exit the frame. The figure's clothing was analyzed by historians, who confirmed the style matched the early years of Fermilab's operation in the 1960s, when the facility was first established. But here is where it gets even more mysterious. Several physicists working at the lab reported that the figure resembled a scientist who had worked there in the 1960s, a researcher who had died in 1971. Colleagues compared the photograph to archived images of this scientist and found striking similarities. The posture, the build, even the angle of the head seemed familiar, yet this man had been dead for nearly 40 years when the photograph was taken. Researchers brought in photography experts, digital forensic specialists, and image analysts. All confirmed the photograph was genuine, not doctored, not manipulated. The figure was photographically real. Skeptics suggested it might be a double exposure or a reflection, but technical analysis ruled out both possibilities. The camera model didn't allow for double exposures, and there were no reflective surfaces at that angle. Some proposed it was an elaborate hoax, but how? The photographer had no access to period-specific clothing, no accomplice, and no time to stage such an image between frames. Here's an absolutely fascinating thought. Fermilab is a place where scientists regularly manipulate subatomic particles, accelerate them to nearly light speed, and probe quantum phenomena that challenge our understanding of time and space. What if their experiments created a momentary rupture in space-time? What if this figure was a glimpse of a parallel timeline, or an echo from the past that briefly intersected with the present. Some physicists at the facility quietly suggest that if parallel universes exist, and many quantum theories say they do, a particle accelerator might be precisely the kind of place where barriers between realities could momentarily thin. Scientists still study it. The figure's identity remains officially unconfirmed, captured by technology designed to record objective reality. How is that even possible? Ready for the finale? Then listen closely now. Number 1. The Pedro Oliva Ramirez case. What you're about to hear is perhaps the most well-documented and disturbing reality glitch ever recorded. It involves a man who woke up in a hospital, surrounded by family he didn't recognize, living a life he had never lived, with memories of a completely different existence, and the medical records prove he wasn't lying. September 1986, Seville, Spain. A man regained consciousness in a hospital bed after a serious motorcycle accident. Doctors were relieved. He'd been in a coma for several days. His family gathered around, his wife, his children, his parents. But when he opened his eyes, he looked at them with complete confusion and growing horror. "Who are you?" he asked. They told him their names, his wife, his children. He shook his head, increasingly distressed. "I don't have a wife. I don't have children. My name is Pedro Oliva Ramirez, and you're not my family." The doctors initially assumed brain trauma from the accident, amnesia, confusion, standard post-coma disorientation. But as Pedro spoke, it became clear this was something far stranger. He knew his name, the same name as the patient in the bed. He knew his birth date, his childhood, his education, but the details were all wrong. He insisted he was a corporate executive in a different industry, described living in a different city, named different parents, a different wife, different children. When shown photographs of his life, he didn't recognize anyone or anything. Here's what makes this case extremely eerie. Pedro's memories were internally consistent, detailed, and specific. He described his office layout, his colleagues' names, his wedding day, of which matched the reality around him. Psychologists conducted extensive evaluations. They used every technique available to detect fabrication or delusion. Pedro passed every test. He genuinely believed he was telling the truth. His emotional distress was profound and real. He grieved for a life and family he insisted existed but couldn't find. Medical teams documented everything meticulously. They brought in neurologists who confirmed his brain function was normal, no damage to memory centers, no signs of trauma-induced psychosis. They consulted psychiatrists who found no evidence of dissociative disorders or schizophrenia. They showed him documents with his signature, and he confirmed it was his handwriting, but said he'd never signed those specific documents. They played him videos from family events, and he watched himself, his body, his face living a life he had no memory of living. Time and time again, Pedro maintained his alternative life story with absolute consistency. He could describe his real office building floor by floor. He named street addresses in cities where, in this reality, he'd never lived. Investigators actually visited some of these locations and found they existed, but Pedro had never been there according to any records. He described business deals and corporate structures that made sense, but it never involved him in this timeline. It was as though he possessed genuine memories of a life that never happened, or that happened elsewhere. For months, Pedro struggled to accept his new reality. He went through profound psychological distress. His wife and children were strangers to him, yet they had decades of documented history together. Photographs, home videos, financial records, everything confirmed this was his life. But he had no emotional connection to any of it. Researchers who studied his case noted something chilling. Pedro's alternative life story wasn't random. It followed logical patterns. The career path he described made sense given his education and skills. The family he remembered matched the socioeconomic patterns of his actual family. It was a parallel life similar enough to be believable, different enough to be distinct. Over time, Pedro slowly integrated into the life that apparently was his. He relearned his relationships, accepted on an intellectual level the reality around him, but he never truly remembered it. In interviews years later, he described feeling like an actor playing a role, performing a life that belonged to someone else. He'd look at his children and feel fondness but not recognition. DC photographs from before the accident and feel like he was looking at a stranger who happened to share his face. What happened to Pedro Oliva Ramirez? Did the accident somehow shift him between parallel realities, swapping him with another version of himself? Is it possible that there's another Pedro somewhere, equally confused, waking up in a life that isn't his? Or did the trauma of the accident unlock memories of a quantum superposition, a glimpse of the life he might have lived if different choices had been made? Medical science has no explanation. The case remains open, documented, and completely unexplained. A thought that is as fascinating as it is terrifying. If this can happen to one person, could it happen to anyone? Could you wake up tomorrow in a subtly different reality and nobody would believe you because all the evidence says this is your life? Absolutely fascinating.